Hello again, curious relatives. It's your old Uncle Jeff on March 15th, 2022, the Ides of March. Not a very good day for Julius Caesar back in 44 BC, but kind of a gray, rainy day here on Savas, so time for a vlog. I'll pick up the years 90 to 95. We were making frequent trips to San Diego. And every time I'd go, I'd visit Jack's favorite medium, June Sieber, who was an elderly lady from the Ozarks who had been born with the gift, as she called it. So she would give me readings. A lot of the stuff was fairly general, and I thought, well, she could just say this to anybody. But almost in every reading, something very specific would pop up, and so I knew she was a true medium, and Jack had said the same thing. The first thing she told me once was, she said, "Oh, your dad is here." And he says, he now knows that you always knew what you were to do in life, even if he disagreed and made a fuss about it. And she looked at me and she says, "Does that mean anything to you?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, it does." I didn't tell her it was about the confrontation over being gay, but I knew for sure that's what it was, because that had occurred only 3 years before his death. Another time she said, "Oh, there's someone here. I can't really see them, but they're writing in this real unusual script handwriting up in the air. Lennie." She goes, "Huh, who's that? Who's he?" And I said, "Well, it's my grandmother, Lennie." And she said, "Oh," she said, it felt sort of like a strong, almost masculine energy." And I said, "Well, that could describe her." And she goes, "Huh. Oh, okay." Now she's laughing, and she's got a big basket full of wildflowers and all kinds of beautiful flowers. And now she's holding up in her hand a bunch of leaves, kind of big ones that look like they've been flat or pressed. And, I just kept on recording. I didn't give her any information then, but at the end I said, well, my grandmother was a great gardener. She taught my sister how to garden, and both she and Judy had similar gardens with wildflowers, etc. And she was a ceramist, and she used to take these large leaves, press them into the clay and make plates, cut out the leafy edges, and then add some more detail work to make a stem. And we all had a set of Nani's leaf plates. In fact, I think Judy has ours, so maybe they'll get passed down to some of you people listening to this. So if you think they're sort of weird, they came from your great or great grandmother. About 1993, Randy was now sober, going to AA, but he still liked to go back to Apollo's bar. He would just have coffee or soda, and he met the new bartender there, Mark. They got to talking, and Mark said, "I really have a problem with alcohol too. I really shouldn't be working here." And Randy offered to sponsor him in AA, so he did. That winter we were going on a trip to Barbados with Corky and Bill and 2 friends of theirs, and by this time we had 3 cats and a parrot, and we needed somebody to stay with the animals because that was just too much for our friend Joni to come up and do anymore. So Mark came and stayed at our house while we were gone, and when we got back from the trip, he really was having problems where he was renting a room. The owner had a boyfriend that moved in and didn't really want Mark in the house, and so he just stayed with us for the duration. During this time, starting 1995, I was back working family practice at Cigna, which I did for the next 5 years. Randy was doing his cosmetology, mostly doing hair coloring and perms for older ladies, because that's what he liked to do, and he was doing it out of our house. Mark would occasionally have a job working as a waiter, but like most of his jobs, they would last a month or 2 or maybe 3 at the most, and then he'd have some sort of argument with the owner wanting to tell him how to run his business or something, and he'd get fired. So most of the time they were home making plans, building on Randy's and my desire to run a B&B, and we were going to look for a different property in Phoenix to move to that we could turn into a B&B. They finally found one on Glendale Avenue, and we bought it, and even though we couldn't sell our other house right away, we kept renting it out for 2 years because it made good money that way. And then shortly after we tried to do that, we found out we were in a special part of Phoenix that had a historic zoning overlay where they wouldn't let you change the zoning, and you needed that for a B&B. But we found out you could build an adult assisted care, and you didn't need special zoning for that, so we changed our focus, and we built that on the property. And by 1999, we'd all three taken the course to become care home managers, and we were in the process to getting it certified. In 1997, I made a trip back to Minnesota because it was our 30th class reunion, and it was my first time to go to Lakewood Cemetery after Mom had been interred in the crypt with Dad. So I stopped there on my way out to Olivia. I was staying with Corky and Bill in St. Paul, and I saw that everything looked nice, and I was enjoying the nice gardens and reflecting pond that's right across from their crypt. And I decided to do a short meditation, so I did one for 15 or 20 minutes. During this time, I got the first visitation and meditation by someone I actually knew. It was a deceased classmate named Jeff Witt. Jeff had committed suicide about 7 months before, and he came in my meditation, smiled, and said, tell everybody at the reunion I'm okay and that I love them, and tell Mary I love her. And the backstory is he and my good friend Mary Mealhouse had dated since 6th grade. Jeff had unfortunately inherited mental illness from his father, who was bipolar. I don't think it was ever diagnosed, but Jeff had been diagnosed with it, and he had done well on lithium, and then they were in the process of switching 2 of his medications around, so he went into kind of a depressive slump. Mary was gone as she taught first grade or daycare at that time, and he couldn't get a hold of his counselor, his psychologist, who always talked him out of these things, and he just went in the downstairs bathroom and shot himself through the heart, and of course she came home and found him. She and I had been talking on the phone a lot. I'd been giving her counseling and trying to help her through this, and she had originally said, I just can't go to the reunion, but then she came to the realization that yes, I indeed have to go, and I have to write a speech and explain to the class about what bipolar disorder is, because Jeff and Mary were our boy and girl staters, and we're very prominent classmates and both honor students, and the other students looked up to that whole group. I was also in that group, and we'd all been friends most of our life. Jeff had come in 4th grade, and of course I'd known Mary since birth. So she did that, and she gave a very nice speech, and I think she was buoyed up by the fact that I'd had this visitation from Jeff just earlier in the day. She didn't allude to it or anything, but it helped her a lot, because I had taken her out for coffee once I got to town and told her all the details, which actually brought tears to her eyes. In December 98, Kay Randall May, my medium friend, and her scientist husband Judd came over for dinner, and Mark and Randy made dinner, and we all 5 of us enjoyed the evening. We wanted them to stay for some after dinner drinks, but Kay especially just seemed kind of in a hurry to leave, and she said, no, you've got to go to work tomorrow, you need your rest, and so we're going to go home. Well, she was right, because later she did say that she sensed something wasn't quite right with me, and about 5 hours later I woke up in the middle of the night with chest pain and was having a heart attack, and of course I woke up Randy and Mark, and this panicked them, and 911 came and took me to the hospital, and they gave me 2 doses of the clot buster drug, and on the 2nd dose I just felt the pain all go away, and so I knew it worked. And the angiogram showed that all my arteries were clear except for one little 20% plaque in the main artery, and that may have been larger because that was the one that had been inflamed and opened up and let the gooey gelatinous cholesterol stuff out, which traveled to the end of the artery and gave me a very small heart attack on the inside only. So it wasn't a bad one, but it was a wake-up call at 49 that worrying about something can cause that. Well, what I was worrying about was Randy had a lymph node biopsy on his neck about 8-9 months before. That was just inflammation. It had come back, and he'd gone back to the surgeon to get another biopsy, but the surgeon said, "Oh no, it's just infected. Here's some antibiotic." And Randy's primary physician, Doug Cunningham, and I didn't believe this, so he got another opinion from another surgeon. That was coming up just a week or two after Christmas. And somehow, I think, in my mind, I already knew it was going to be bad news. Indeed, it turned out to be non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Mark also mentioned that week that I had my heart attack, he'd had a weird dream where he saw our little white Pontiac Grand Am, one of my favorite car, all scraped up from a car accident. The sides were all scraped up, pushed in, and Kay said, well, that's a sort of an archetype in a dream, meaning there's going to be a health problem. And indeed, Mark could be quite psychic at times too. Randy took chemo and radiation for this huge growth on his neck, and it looked kind of like a tomato that was opening up, and the chemo would make it shrink. He said he could actually feel it shrinking as the chemo was going through his veins, but that just meant it was a very active tumor, and that's bad news because it would shrink down to almost nothing, and then within 3 to 4 weeks before the next treatment, it was back up to as big as it was. And by September, it was obvious nothing was working. They even tried special monoclonal antibody made to his genotype of his tumor. It didn't work. They tried to do palliative radiation just to shrink it down so that Randy didn't have so much pressure in his throat, but by that time they'd had to put a feeding tube directly into his stomach because he couldn't swallow anymore, and he finally just said, no, that's enough. So we told all the relatives, come on down in October and help us with the fall planting, and Judy came down, and Claudia and Lois and the two boys, they were really young then, they all came, and they just had a good time because it was going to be the last time they would see Randy. On November 7th, he started getting confused, and we had to admit him to the hospice overnight. He did get a little clearer by the evening and was hoping he could come home the next day. However, early in the morning, he tried to get up off the toilet without assistance. The aide had turned her back. She was in the bathroom with him, and he did a header straight ahead into the corner of the bathroom wall, which split his scalp open. And they took him to the ER and called us and said, what happened. And, when they had him stitched up, Mark would go with our Suburban because he could lie down in the back and take him back to the hospice. And so I went to work and was seeing patients. It was a Monday, and they called Mark about 4 p.m. to come get him. He was all ready, but they said, he's been sort of in and out of consciousness all day. And we said, well, sometimes he's like that, but the real reason he was doing that was that he was having a bleed into his brain, and when Mark walked into the room to see him, he discovered him deceased. So it was a surprise both to him and the ER staff. And I was on my way to the hospital, so I got there to see him for one last time. We had the funeral about 5 days later at the Self-Realization Temple in Phoenix because Randy didn't go to any church, and because I was a member there, they graciously offered to do the funeral. And there were even local people from his hometown of Argyle, Minnesota, wintering in Phoenix, who came, who I think probably thought this was kind of an odd church, but then we had a nice reception at home for everybody. Kay and Judd were there, of course, and I asked her, when can we try to contact Randy? And she said, the best thing is to wait 4 to 6 weeks until he's more used to being on the other side. So 5 weeks later, on about December 15th, I made an appointment with her. It was a Saturday, and it was at 1 p.m. When I got there, she said, well, he's been with me all morning because I cleared my schedule. I wasn't going to see anybody else, and he was real excited to come through, and I felt his energy. And she said, while I was meditating in the mid-morning, he said, get up and go sit by this keyboard you have. And Kay had purchased a little electronic keyboard years before, the idea to teach herself how to play. and she'd never done anything with it, really couldn't play it other than me doing a few simple tunes. Well, he said, put your hands on the keys, and while she did that, he literally matched up his energy field with her body, and she could feel him coming down through her hands, and he started playing Christmas carols because that was his favorite thing to do this time of year. And so she's playing two-handed, chord-like Christmas carols on this keyboard. Not the whole carol. He would play about a third or a half of it, and then he'd start into another one. Her husband, Judd, was around the corner in the kitchen, and he heard this music, and he thought, oh, she must have a program or something in that keyboard where she can flip it on, and it just plays Christmas carols. So he peeked around the corner, but he saw her sitting there and playing it, and he says, well, that's impossible. She can't play the piano. Well, so he stood there and watched, and he counted how many different Christmas carols, and he said she played partial parts of 18 different Christmas carols, but it was all done by Randy, playing through her hands. And Judd, being a scientist and a true skeptic, however, he does understand his wife's powers. He had to admit he had never seen that before, but he couldn't deny that it occurred. So it was good that it was witnessed by him. When we got to the reading, the only other things I remember is that he said that he had stayed with his body the whole time until it was cremated, which was after the funeral. It was about 9 or 10 days after his death, because there was only one crematorium in Phoenix, and so people were literally stacked up waiting to be cremated there, and he was at the funeral home where the crematorium was the whole time until it was done and he could move on. And of course, he also came in spirit to the funeral and was around everybody, giving them hugs, even though they didn't realize he was there. The main thing he was doing on the other side was going to the Library of Wisdom and looking at the Akashic records. And for those who don't know what those are, this is a recording of everything you've ever said or done in this life, every past life you've ever had, plus all the lives of everybody who's ever lived in the whole universe. So when you're in spirit, you have access to all this. And since time doesn't run in a linear fashion like it does here, you can actually look at all these different lives simultaneously, and you're able to keep them apart and understand them. And so he was having a lot of fun reviewing all the different lives and how they affected this life and how they affected karma he'd had in previous lives. And this is something we all do when we first cross over. I think I'll probably be able to wrap up all the psychic stuff in one more vlog. It will mostly be various interesting things I found out about myself, past lives, and actually some things that have happened here on Saba. So that'll be next.